senior diplomat and prolific author and poet, Abhay Kumar, who has just been appointed as India's ambassador to Georgia, was born and raised within a whispering distance of the Nalanda University, arguably the world's first residential university. However, by his own admission, growing up, he was not quite aware of the great center of ancient learning and its profound civilizational impact on India. Decades later, he has filled that gap with a remarkable new book, Nalanda How It Changed the World. Although many scholars have said the university as we know it now was founded in 420 C current era, which at one point had a library with 9 million books and 10,000 students, Abhay Kumar's research pushes the makings of the Nalanda as a center of learning by over a millennium, making it contemporaneous to Gautam Buddha. Abhay Kumar spoke to MCR from New Delhi. Welcome to Mayank Chhaya Reports. It's always a great pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with you again. It's a pleasure and joy for me to be on your
Likewise.
show.
Likewise. Congratulations again on your new book. This is number what? Do you remember how many you've written?
It's my first book of history.
Okay.
Ouch.
Let's start with that. It's obviously, as the title suggests, it's about Nalanda and how it changed the world.
Right.
My first indirect exposure to Nalanda was via the 1970 film Johnny Mera Naam,
I
where
know. I remember that song.
where Devanand and Hema Malini sing Vada To Nibhaya, with
Uh,
Jagdish Raj and other constables walking in the background. Jagdish Raj,
correct.
the eternal police inspector of Hindi cinema. And it struck me that it was a protected site, I suppose, even then, but they allowed them to shoot a whole song there.
Yes, and see, that's how Nalanda has survived in your memories.
What about you? What is your first memory of Nalanda?
Well, I am from Nalanda, so
Right. I,
I
that's-
I think I remember visiting it with my parents and looking at those huge red bricks and just it was like just an interesting sight. I did not really know the significance of Nalanda when I visited in my childhood.
right.
And I thought that the huge stupa, which is actually Sariputra's stupa, I always thought it was the library, the great
I see.
library of Nalanda. So, and yeah, going inside the viharas and walking there, uh, it was sort of a regular trip for us because it was the most accessible place apart from Rajgir or the
Right.
ancient Rajgir,
Right.
where I am from actually. So, so that's it's sort
You come from a region absolutely steeped in glorious history.
exactly. I realized it much later.
I mean, the names that you mentioned, they're absolute, they're the heart of Indian civilization.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet, till I started researching about Nalanda, I had no idea about 90% of the things.
I see. I see.
Yes, yes,
Speaking of which, the popular view is that Nalanda was founded in 420 CE, current era, which at one
right.
point had a library with some 9 million books and had 10,000 students. What's been your finding as you research this book?
Oh, well, I mean, Nalanda is much more ancient, actually.
Oh, really?
Yes. So see, that's the story I tell in this book. That most of the people, even in India, even very well-known scholars, they say Nalanda, Mahavihara began in, during the Gupta dynasty, the Gupta Empire,
Right.
and but actually, it's not true. So, and that's what my book is all about. So Nalanda's history goes back to Buddha's time, and
I see. So you're talking about a millennium before this.
exactly. So 600 BC, which is almost 600 years before Christ. Here you can see a serpent, on the
Right.
cover,
Yeah.
and you might wonder what is the connection between Nalanda and the serpent. So Nalanda, was the favorite resort, in the sense, Amravana, the mango groves of Nalanda was a place which was favorite of Buddhas to spend time there. And there was a pond beside within the mango grove, and that pond had a snake, and
I
the
see.
snake's name was Nalanda. So, that's one of the legends, which is also recounted by the Chinese traveler Xuanzang. Uh, and this is and serpent, is also a symbol of renewal and immortality.
Right.
So I also tell the story of how Nalanda actually, only the physical structure of Nalanda was destroyed. But the quest of Nalanda, the quest for knowledge remained. It survived actually and was reborn into many Nalandas across the world.
I
So
see.
yes, so this is how uh, I tell this story. But let's get back to the origin of Nalanda University. So I mean, so many scholars, they say that the first Mahavihara structure, the archaeological evidence shows that the first viharas were built during uh, the Gupta dynasty, and Kumaragupta I, who is well known as Sakraditya. He
Mhm.
was the first one who built the monastery there, and this is actually not correct. So see, there is another figure, Buddha's right hand man. You may know about him or may not. His name is Sariputra,
Yes.
and Sariputra is and Mogglayana. These are the two chief male disciples of Buddha, and both come from Nalanda. And Sariputra was born in Nalanda, while Mogglayana, he was born in a village nearby, and it's Sariputra who actually, when Buddha was enlightened, he went to, you all know, Sarnath, and turning of the Dharma Chakra,
Right.
started there in Sarnath. Buddha's first sermon happens there, and then Buddha comes to Rajgrah, which
Okay.
was anyway his favorite abode. And he spends his time at Venuvana and at Gridhakut Parvat, the vulture
Mhm.
peak.
Right.
And and he's patronized by the no other than Bimbisara, the king of Magad, and father of Ajat Satru, who later founds Patliputra.
Where does Bindusara figure in this?
Not Bindusara, Bimbisara.
Bindi.
Bindusara is much later.
Okay. Okay.
Bindusara is the father of King Ashoka,
Right.
Emperor Ashoka. That is
Okay.
six. That is 300 years later.
Okay.
So
Okay.
this is Bimbisara,
Okay.
who is a major figure in both Jainism and Buddhism, and he patronized both. So that's how, and it's in Rajgrah that after, so when you have become enlightened, you are in search of people whom you can tell what is enlightenment, because even if you are enlightened, you need others, right, to
Right.
propagate what you have learned, what you have realized as an enlightened being. And so the first five disciples of Buddha were the five, ascetics who were also looking for enlightenment along with Buddha, and they become his disciple. But they are just five persons. Buddhism needs to grow,
Right.
so he comes to Rajgrah again, comes back. Buddha is a very very intelligent man.
Yeah.
So he comes to the royal capital, Rajgrah, where he gets a Bimbisara, the king of Magad. He offers him a bamboo grove called Venuvan, as a retreat where Buddha can spend time. And Buddha goes to this hill. Rajgira is full of hills. There are five hills in Rajgira, and this he goes to a hilly place where he sits, and this place is called Gridhakut Parvat, a very sacred place. So this is where he meets at Venuvan. He meets Sariputra,
Hmm.
and Sariputra actually has another guru that time. He's not a follower of Buddha. He's a disciple of Sanjay Belatiputta, or who is a contemporary of Buddha and another great philosopher.
I
So,
see.
yeah, so a rival of Buddha, and so is Mahavira, a rival of Buddha. So there are six main gurus that time, or six main seekers who are active in Rajgir, and Rajgir being the capital city, New York of that
Right.
time. Everybody flocks to Rajgir. So Sariputra, what he does when he listens to one of Buddha's disciple,
Hmm.
he immediately feels that this is more insightful, and he goes with Mogliaina, who is his childhood friend from Nalanda, which is just 15 kilometers from Rajgir, a suburb of Rajgir that time. And he joins Buddha. He becomes his disciple. And he not only becomes a disciple, but he brings 500 other followers of Sanjaya to Buddha. So Buddha, Buddha being a very intelligent man, he tells that Sariputra will be my right
I
hand
see.
disciple. He will be my right hand man, and he's known as the Dharma Senapati, or the general of Dharma.
I see.
It's the Sariputra who is the commander in chief, who lays the foundations of a religion,
Right.
a, codifies what Buddha says, and so along with Mogglayana. So it's the Sariputra who plays a critical role in the establishment of Buddhism as a religion. Imagine if you can have 500 persons that time. It's like getting a five lakh people, from
Yeah. Right.
one group to another, and uh, in today's age. So you can imagine the kind of influence Sariputra builds, and he is the right hand man, and it is actually Sariputra's, stupa, which Ashoka builds. When Ashoka, after the Kalinga War, he comes to fold of Buddhism,
I
and
see.
he then gets all the, eight stupas of Buddha opened, and get his remains and spreads it all across, the world.
Right.
And he sends his remains to 84,000 stupas, it is said. So it is Emperor Ashoka who builds a stupa for Sariputra in Nalanda, and today the largest structure you see is actually Sariputra's stupa in seven successive phases.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yes, and
Now this is.
entire Nalanda University is built around that stupa, because that's the most sacred site.
Mhm.
And earlier, constructions from third century BCE to fourth century AD, they're all clustered constructions around clustered layout of monasteries or viharas. So Ashoka not only founds a stupa, he builds a stupa, but he also founds a vihara,
Okay.
a not of concrete, but those days, viharas were built of perishable materials, wood and other things, and it's there where Abhidharma is started, being taught. Buddhist Abhidharma,
Right.
Bud- uh, is the canonical uh, texts of Buddhism,
Right.
and this is how the reputation of Nalanda spreads as a center for learning Abhidharma, and it starts growing, and this is third century BC. And and now the Archaeological Survey of India has found the remains of the Mauryan structure, which is at the core of Sariputra's stupa.
I
So
see.
that site is, which is the nucleus, the core of Nalanda Mahavihara, is Sariputra stupa, the site number 3, which is the largest structure even today. And so it's actually in the third century BC, you can say, that Nalanda Mahavihara begins. Not Mahavihara, that I'll tell you later.
I
But
understood.
a vihara begins,
Right. Right.
vihara.
You know.
And yes,
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's remarkable that you should mention it because, like I said in our exchange, The Dalai Lama once told me that the source of all Buddhist knowledge that we
Mhm,
have
mhm,
is from Nalanda. So the way
mhm,
you're describing, it's pretty clear that that's the
mhm,
fountainhead of everything that we think of
mhm.
Buddhism today.
So, well, we have to wait another like a millennia to reach there.
I
What
understand, but I thought I'll just slip that in because it is
that's
remarkable.
completely true, because that's 100% true, because Nalanda is the mother and father and grandmother and grandfather of Tibetan Buddhism, which follows Vajrayana Buddhism.
Right.
And Vajrayana is a unique evolution of Nalanda. It has happened. Vajrayana actually has evolved from Nalanda. So so now I'll come to the next stage, that to come to the Vajrayana, we have to go to the 7th and 8th century AD,
Oh,
or so we are almost like 1,000 years earlier right now. Uh, can you imagine? We are 1,000 years in history back from that point.
right.
So in the first to second century AD, after Ashoka, 300 years later, you have a great philosopher named Nagarjuna.
Absolutely. Yes. Great
And
figure. Great figure. Yes.
yes, so he's considered a great figure even today in the West, as a great philosopher, and a very original thinker. And he comes up with his philosophy of Madhyamaka, or the middle path, which comes from Buddha's teachings. But Nagarjuna, being a philosopher, he develops his own philosophy, Madhyamaka, and his book called Madhyamaka Karika.
Right.
Uh, which is Madhyamaka philosophy is also known as Sunyavad. Where the ultimate reality is Sunyata, uh, and 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 I'm hinting to you at the origin of zero.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Yeah. We are almost coming to Aryabhat suddenly.
Yes, so that is 500 years later.
I know. I know. So, I
Right.
mean, look at the connections.
Yes, but Sunyata is. I have just done a number of paintings on Sunyata. Sunyata, the crux of Sunyata comes from Hridaya Pragya Paramita Sutra, which is said as a legend that the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara
Hmm.
uh, shared this knowledge with Sariputra, nobody else, Sariputra, at Gridhakut Parvat at Rajgriha. In
Oh,
presence of Buddha nodding to his, Buddha does not say anything here, but it's the Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva who is sharing this. And it is said that Nagarjuna actually later on, because there is a 600 years difference between Sariputra and Nagarjuna. So as we know, how we try to find some good antecedent to everything. So Nagarjuna tells that it was actually Avalokiteshvara told these things to Sariputra, and then uh, I have retrieved this knowledge from the Nagas, the kings,
right.
the and but actually it seems that Nagarjuna wrote those himself, and attributed it to Nagas, and Avalokiteshvara and so on.
Okay.
It's a probability. But Nagarjuna is a major player in Mahayana Buddhism. So he's the one he's considered as the originator of Pragya Paramita Sutra. And Pragya Paramita Sutra, or the perfection of transcendent wisdom, is the key sutra in the Mahayana Buddhism, and lays the foundation of Mahayana Buddhism. And Nagarjuna, being staying and teaching at Nalanda, in a vihara, so that brings Nalanda as the birthplace of this Pragya Paramita Sutras, but attributed to Rajgrah, which is just 10-15
Yeah.
kilometers. Yes. And so see what happens. That is in first to second century AD. And then you have various patrons of various rich people, men, women, both, donating to the monastery. And suddenly, see, if you want today to found an university, to establish an university, you will not establish an university suddenly to any random place. You will do it which has a tradition, which
Right.
could potentially be a place which is renowned, or so now we come to the King Sakraditya, who is considered as a as the founder of the Nalanda Mahavihara. So that is Kumar Gupta I, and he's identified as Kumar Gupta I in the 5th century AD, and that's uh, uh, that's what we find the structures today.
Oh, I see. So that's why the date 427C that people talk
Yes,
about.
exactly. So that
Okay.
is, but they do not know the background that how come, Kumar Gupta came suddenly one day and decided to establish
No,
a
it wasn't
vihara.
like that.
It
Yes,
doesn't work like that, no.
right.
And you have these major other, but not only Nagarjuna, but you have the great philosopher Asanga and Vasubandhu and Arya Deva. Nagarjuna's disciple is Arya Deva. Then you have Asanga and Vasubandhu. Both they are cousins from Gandhar,
I
and
see.
they come to Nalanda. So one of them is a founder of the another school of philosophy called Yogacara. And so these are the two major philosophies taught at Nalanda, Madhyamaka and Yogacara, for centuries, for almost 700, 800 centuries. And it is actually from Yogacara that the Vajrayana evolves, the Tantric Buddhism, what we call.
I see.
So yes, so and that's a unique contribution of Nalanda. So when the Dalai Lama says that all the knowledge that comes from Nalanda, he talks about the great luminaries of Nalanda from Nagarjuna up to Atisha. I think he has listed 17 or 18
Right.
of those luminaries. But in my book, I mention more than 2 dozen luminaries of Nalanda with their biographies,
I see.
and what contributions did they make, what are their books, what exactly did they do. The Buddhism has a direct link, Tibetan Buddhism has a direct link to Nalanda, actually. So it has traveled from Nalanda. Great masters like Santa Rakshita and Padma Sambhava, they are the major
Again,
contributors.
a big name, Padmasambhava.
Yes, but not only religion, but also the Tibetan script actually owes its origin in Nalanda, the person called Thonmi Sambata, who comes to Nalanda, takes the scripts to Tibet, and it becomes the Tibetan script.
I must interject here. I'm sorry about that because when the Chinese, while
Mhm,
talking about taking over Tibet,
mhm,
they pretend as if there is a sort of a linguistic continuity between their language and Tibetan, which is completely untrue. Now
mhm,
that you're telling me that the script came from here,
mhm,
conclusively shows that what they are saying has been consistently wrong.
mhm. Right. So here, I mentioned this, the great luminaries. How has it traveled? And one of the great contributions of Nalanda, I mentioned that how did that happen? And you can see that there is if you look at the Tibetan script, mm, uh, and it's how it has traveled from Nalanda, you will find the whole journey and the link, the person who did it. So let me read this passage. A
Okay.
Tibetan scholar, Thonmi Sambhota, who studied at Nalanda Mahavihara, devised scripts for the Tibetan language based on the Devanagari and Kashmiri scripts. The scripts said to have been invented by him were based on the Gupta scripts, which had been in use in India since mid 4th century CE. He simplified the Tibetan alphabet by shortening 34 consonants and 16 vowels of Devanagari into 30 consonants and 4 vowels in Tibetan alphabet. He also composed 6 texts on Tibetan grammar based on Sanskrit grammar.
Oh,
This
I see.
is
Tell
and
me something. How long did you? I mean, it obviously seems like monumental work from the way you're describing it. Your book. How long did you take to write this?
about more than 2 years. I mean, it's been a lot of research work, and I was not aware of these things until started reading and
I see.
finding these things. Yes, so I mean, what you say, Deepak Tale Andhera, right? So
BG.
So I am from Nalanda, but I was not aware of and most of the people are not aware of who were the great masters of Nalanda, who were the great luminaries,
Right.
what contributions did they make. So most of the people I came across, they were, these names were really, very new to me, and what contributions they had made, like Dinanaga or Bhava Viveka or Chandrakirti or Dharmakirti,
Right.
so many of them, and their contributions are huge actually.
Yeah. I'm jumping a bit, but we mentioned earlier about Aryabhat. Uh, is did he ever head the university in the 6th century CE?
Well, Aryabhat is considered a luminary of Nalanda. See, Aryabhat he used to live in Kusumpur, which is another name of Patliputra, and he's certainly thought to be studying and teaching at Nalanda, because Nalanda was not just limited to study of Buddhism, various schools of Buddhism, but Nalanda was very strong in mathematics,
Right.
astronomy, in logic and grammar and so on. So he is, he is considered to be a teacher at Nalanda. May not be heading the monastery,
Okay.
but teaching at Nalanda.
Okay. Okay. So, but he was obviously a major figure given his background in mathematics.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh, he's a major. He was born in 476 CE,
Mhm.
and was active in 6th century BC. And he is the person who is the first person. His seminal book is called Aryabhatiya,
Right.
and Aryabhatiya is the first. Aryabhatiya is just 121 actually slokas, and in these he mentions he uses, for the first time, zero as a digit. So he is the person who has made zero, used zero as a concept, as a
Right.
digit.
Right.
And later on, Brahma Gupta,
Right.
who is active
He
after him,
perfected that. Yes. Yeah.
yeah, he used it as a number,
Right.
like any other number, 1, 2, 3,
Right.
and wrote Surya Siddhanta, which is actually an improvement of the works of based on the works of Aryabhatya.
Yeah.
And later on, Surya Siddhanta travels to Arab world, becomes Sindh Hind,
Right.
and from which algebra, geometry, and algebra comes, and
Absolutely.
algorithm comes, from Al-Khwarizmi,
Yeah.
who improved his work, brought some of his own innovations, and that's how zero travels. Actually, not only zero, but the numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4 we use are actually not numbers originated in Bihar, probably in Nalanda, during the
Think
modern
about
Ashok.
that. Think about that.
Yes,
Are
Magadha.
you able to establish sort of a link between the idea, the philosophy of shunyata and shunya, zero, being what we are talking about?
Yes, because see, the idea of sunyata comes through these Buddhist texts, and it talks about emptiness,
Right.
emptiness of inherent existence actually. And you see, it happens, that idea originates in Rajgir Nalanda intellectual complex. And you have also the numbers originating there, in the which is later. Sunyata comes in 6th century BC during the Buddha himself. Buddha himself talks about Sunyata, and in his Pratitya Samutpada doctrine.
Right.
Uh, and the doctrine of codependent origination, that's what it means. And then you suddenly have a person using this concept, which is empty. I mean, which is
Right.
what is sunya is basically empty,
Emptiness. Yeah.
emptiness. And so I see that link, because you cannot have this uh, uh, digit without a philosophy,
Uh,
behind it. So I see a link between the sunyata of Nagarjuna
yeah.
uh, being used as uh, being given an expression by Aryabhat, then as a digit, and then uh, by
Brahmagupta.
Brahmagupta as a number.
Right. Right.
And there's a clear path how these numbers and zero has traveled to the west actually.
And think about this. This is evolving over centuries.
Right,
and
right.
how the knowledge would have been disseminated in those days of the kind of communication that we are used to, obviously. So it's quite extraordinary that the sheer oral transmission of these profound ideas.
Yes, not only that, you have actually, we owe a lot to Buddhism itself. So the scholastic method we know today, or the recursive argument method we call it, it originates in that region as well, where you have which leads later to medieval scientific inquiry. In the medieval times, how do you do science? So you ask question after question. You have
Right.
argument followed by a sub argument followed by a sub argument. So that's how the science began, by asking questions. And you can see from the evidence of the works of Vasubandhu, how recursive argument, Nagarjuna himself, how Nagarjuna uses recursive argument.
Right.
And later on, that leads to the scientific inquiry. And not only that, you have a huge contribution in medicine, actually, alchemy, astronomy, from Nalanda.
I'm digressing a bit. I think I'll come back to that question in a bit. But I was reading up, and one of the things that people mentioned is about in around the 1190s, when it was destroyed by the marauders led by the Turkish Afghan military general Bakhtiar Khilji. Now, that's so many centuries after the origin of what we are talking about. Is there some substance to that he did indeed ransack that area?
Yes, 100%. See, so what happened that, the Pala rulers of Bengal,
Mhm.
and Magad, actually, the Pala dynasty, they they were patrons of Nalanda, but they also, I think, were a bit jealous of Nalanda, because Nalanda was so old that it was not really, under full control. So they founded monasteries nearby Nalanda, like one monastery at Odantapuri, which is
Mhm.
just kilometers away, around 20 kilometers away from Nalanda, and and other monasteries.
Mhm.
So, uh, according to the Persian historian Minhaj Siraz, who has written his work called Tabakte Nasri, which is, he mentions the invasion of Odantapuri monastery, which is a nearby monastery from Nalanda,
Okay,
uh, in his by Bakhtiar Khilji in 1193 CE.
I
Uh,
see. Okay.
Yes, and it was the two brothers, Samsuddin and Nizamuddin, who served as Bakhtiar Khaljis, and participated in the plunder of Odantapuri and Vikramsila,
Okay.
the other monastery, which is far away, but in Odantapuri particularly. And they tell him, because Minhaz Siraz, he does not go directly, he's not part of the Bakhtiar Khalji's troop. He's writing the accounts of what happened there. And two of these people who participated in the raid of Odantapuri, they tell him about that what happened. And so you can, I mean, people say that, there is no direct evidence of Bakhtiar Khalji going to Nalanda. But can you imagine someone who is raiding all the Buddhist monasteries, is a
Right.
plunderer for the wealth of, has gone to Odantapuri, and
Not
has
gone to, yeah.
left another, the most renowned, most famous monastery, which is just kilometers away, 20 kilometers away.
Right.
He has left that, does not touch it. So it's beyond common sense. And there are evidence of destruction of Nalanda by fire.
I see.
And yes, and but Nalanda was too large. You can see today JNU, right? Can you really destroy JNU by fire? I don't think so.
Yeah.
So or any other large university, it's a you can raid it, you can take away the all the equipments from there, but it's physically impossible to destroy the monastery in 1 or 2 go. But
Right.
there are, eyewitness accounts of this, of raid of Nalanda, because when Bakhtiyar Khalji left after raiding Odantpuri, he stationed his troops in Odantpuri. And later on, a Tibetan monk called Dharma Swamin, he visits Nalanda, and he gives an eye witness account of how these troops raided Nalanda from time to time,
I see.
and how yes, in 1235. So that is about uh, you know about
About 30 odd years from Khilji that we are talking
yeah,
about. Yeah.
40 years, 40 years you can say, 40 years later than Khilji, he writes in 1235 that Nalanda was again attacked by the Turuskas of Odantpuri, and how his, a person called Jayadeva was arrested and put in prison by them, where he learned about when he learned about their plan to raid Nalanda again.
I see.
So he this guy Jayadeva, he succeeded in alerting Pandit Rahul Sribhadra, who was still teaching by in 1235, and all the 70 monks studying there left the Mahavihara except Dharma Swamin. And Dharma Swamin, he hides in a temple of Jnananatha in monastery itself, and a band of 300 Turuska marauders raided the Nalanda Mahavihara. However, they could not find them and returned with whatever they could gather.
Okay.
So there were continuous raids happening.
I see.
So whoever says that, and see, Buddhist monasteries, they were a network of systems. So if you destroy Odantpuri and Vikramsila, do you think that Nalanda would not be affected?
Right.
You have a law and order situation in 20 kilometers radius, where and Nalanda was completely peaceful. Everything was going
No,
on as
it's inconceivable. Yeah, I agree.
possible. So this is the thing. But Nalanda was not completely destroyed by the troops, as you can see, by Bakhtiyar Khalji, because
Right.
it's still intact, still functioning, with only 300 monks.
Right.
He says just 40 years left. It was largely destroyed, but not completely destroyed.
Okay.
The teaching had begun, and there's evidence of the last student of Nalanda being the Dhyanabhadra, who was ordained at Nalanda in the early 14th century. So Nalanda continued in a way, in a lean way, to function for another century or so.
Right.
And right.
I talked about digression earlier, but perhaps nothing to do with the theme of what we are talking about. But I've always been fascinated by, and I've written quite a bit on the concept of kshanika,
Mhm,
from moment to moment to moment. The idea that
mhm,
not existence is basically from moment to moment to moment. So the
mhm,
questions were being asked by other scholars, if it is moment to moment, what exists between those two moments? Now, these are very profound debates happening 1500 years ago. I'm talking
mhm,
about in Kshanika in particular. Have
mhm,
you uh, ever looked at something like that in your
mhm.
interest in this region? The idea
Well,
of Kshanika.
I mean, see, the idea of time itself, is very interesting and profound. What is time actually,
Right.
and is it made of really, uh, these small units, or is it sort of an illusion,
Yeah.
which we try to perceive it through, seconds or minutes
Right.
or
Right.
hours? And is there really a transition, between in past, present, and future, or is it a continuum,
Right.
and all the moments exist simultaneously?
Exactly.
So so these are some, but for practical purposes we try to do that. We divide time, because there are two levels of reality, even in Madhyamaka philosophy of Nagarjuna. You have the conditional reality, and you have the ultimate reality.
Right.
So the conditional reality is how we experience the world, but there is beyond that an ultimate reality. So that time also has different layers. We have the practical time of 24 hours and so
Right.
on.
And
But
then there is the eternal time. Yeah.
yeah, and we all see measure time from Earth's perspective, right? We are living on Earth, so
Right.
Earth going around the year, and Earth rotating on its own axis. If we live on Mars, probably we will have a
It will
different
be
time.
very different, yes.
If we live
Again,
in
Mars,
Earth,
it's different even on the moon. So,
exactly.
just last couple of things. What do you look? How do you look at someone like the Scottish surveyor Francis Buchanan Hamilton? I mean,
Mhm,
in modern sense,
mhm,
it was he who was supposed to have
mhm,
rediscovered in 1812. Is
mhm.
that an accurate view?
Well, so see, I mean, Nalanda was forgotten for quite some time, for at least 400 years, from early 14th century to 1800th century, and it was the writings of Xuanzang,
Okay,
the Chinese traveler, which was actually translated into French by a French, scholar, and then after this French text was then translated into English and read by people, then came to know about this great university which was in Bihar. So it was the Francis Buchanan Hamilton who explored the site of Badagaon, because Nalanda was not called Nalanda, it was called Badagaon, or the great village.
I see.
It had Nalanda had disappeared from the name. Nalanda itself had disappeared, and it was called Badagaon. And he went to Badagaon and explored the site of Badagaon in 1811 and 12,
Okay,
and found some Hindu and Buddhist statues. And it was Markham Kitto who established the connection between the site and the ruins of Nalanda Mahavihara in
okay,
1847. So almost 40 years later, it's
right.
Markham Kitto who establishes. And in 1853, actually, the French sinologist Stanislas Julien, well versed in Sanskrit and Mandarin, published a French translation of Xuanzang's The Tongue Records on the Western Region. So
Okay,
that's the chronology. And then
okay,
you have the great guy who goes to Nalanda and as an explorer, Alexander Cunningham,
okay,
and yes, and who tries to identify the sites visited by Xuanzang and links them,
okay, okay.
and begins
No,
the
this
exploration.
is extraordinary. I'm so glad you did it. My many congratulations. I'll pretty soon pick it up and would love to read it.
It's
This,
a great book. I am so delighted that I could write this book. It's amazing.